Okay. So, trying to make sure I'm syncing everything. I was trying to get better about that. It's about 20 seconds in. We're back to the post commentary. You come over to the side. There's the detour for the Max and Tomato, but then if you climb up the bricks, you get a secret where the little mini boss rush becomes more challenging if you get up here. So,
one of the unfortunate things about this being host commentary, because this level was the obligatory Kirby mini boss level, and because it was on a bridge, I, in the initial recording, asked you to, for a few seconds, edit in Battle on the Big Bridge from, I think, Final Fantasy V was the first game to introduce that
but it was just...
it would just be for a few seconds if you did it anyway, and...
There's no editing jokes in this, because I just wanted... The one advantage to doing this in post, this level, we missed a lot of secrets. So, this is a longer recording than usual, and this is edited down.
And even then, if you did do that, it would have only been a few seconds, and I don't know how Square is with copyright bullshit, so...
Anyway, trying to get back on track here.
Anyway, between recording, something I learned to continue what we're talking about in the last part was the Kirby Dream Collection. The Japanese version of the Dream Collection, it actually has scans of a few old Kirby manga in it.
Yeah, and some slightly different history because the games came out at different times.
Yeah, it's like in the American one, there were years they didn't have a game. They have a gold statue of a character, or if not game, something related to a Kirby. In the Japanese version, the only one of those in the Japanese is the first one.
And now,
they both have a gold statue of Kirby in 1991. After that, Japan has something. So my point is going back to, like we said before, a lot of the unrealistic standards people apply to other collections, you could apply to that, and it's basically, why doesn't the American one acknowledge all of this Japanese material? Because another funny thing about that is, in the American one, Nightmare in Dreamland and Right Back At Ya share a spot because they were both released in 2001 over here. In the Japanese collection, the anime has its own spot. Not only that, the anime also then, in 2001, it was written in Japanese, part of it was written in English, so I could tell what they were saying. The Japanese collection points out that it was translated as Right Back At Ya in other countries.
Yeah.
So you can't even use this argument like, oh, it makes sense for them to not include that because it was the Japanese version or whatever.
Because the Japanese name...
The Japanese name is, I believe, the name a lot of Kirby games have, which is Kirby of the Stars.
Yeah, Kirby of the Stars. And that's boring. So over here in Eagle Land, we have Kirby Right Back At Ya, where it was dubbed by 4Kids, and has a theme that's a hell of an earworm. I do respect the Japanese version, but the fucking big band thing with the Kirby, name's no. Kirby, he's a sword.
Yes, but big band isn't what I...
Maximum think a Kirby, he's coming right back at ya, coming right.
Yes, but a big band isn't exactly what I think of when I think of the Kirby, but then again, because it's an anime, it has two openings in Japan. The first opening has this marching band theme, and that's also kind of weird, but then again, when it's synced to the opening, it makes sense, because all that footage of, them in the, circus and stuff, that's all from the Japanese opening. My point was this is why didn't the American version acknowledge these materials, and if we're going
If we're not going to translate that crap, at least acknowledge
that it existed, but that's another thing. We can make an argument, why didn't they translate them?
Yeah.
And with that, we have the other thing of, it's like, yeah, it's cool that it has episodes of the anime, but why doesn't it have the Japanese versions? And if you're going to say a stupid thing of all of the, like, Japanese versions because, Japan allows, like, a bit more violence or whatever, they want to have that, at least have the Japanese intros. Fucking Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, actually, in the English version, you can watch the original Japanese opening.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's something a lot of modern collections have actually started doing, as they're not afraid to acknowledge the
other countries'
versions of something. Like, Sonic Origins has full scans of the manuals for America, Japan, and Europe.
Mm-hmm. Also, in a minute here, Carson's gonna die, but I left in just to show what happens, death, just because it's not that bad, and I thought it was worth showing this, just to show it, because you lose.
This is the one stage most people who play the game die on, but most people die to the mini-bosses. They rarely ever die to the side shit here.
Anyway,
no.
The other funny thing, all of a sudden, and it's funny given what we were talking about, where certain people talking about the Kirby, all of a sudden certain people are like, why aren't a lot of the sort of side games in there?
Now, I'll be fair and say that's only like one or two comments I've seen, because a somewhat popular YouTuber hasn't said it, at least not to my knowledge. I haven't seen a bunch of people just starting to parry it without thinking on their own. But I do find it funny that I have seen a few people point up, it's like, they have trailers for all these games like Tilt and Tumble and shit, why don't they actually include those?
At least the Game Boy games!
Yeah.
If you don't want to emulate
and that's another, again, funny thing going back to the Japanese version. This is funny given a point I made. Because it, would be the Japanese version, it would cover the games that were never released outside of Japan, like the game people, because I believe this is what its name directly translates to, the Kirby Superstar Stacker, which was a, 1998 Super Nintendo game.
Yes.
Because consoles have a far longer shelf life in Japan. Whereas in America, as soon as the new thing comes out, we throw out the old version and act like it's irrelevant.
Unless you're the PS2, in which case you continue to exist because nobody wanted a PS3. And that goes into a semi-controversial thing, which is funny because of an argument, to shift to a different semi-related topic for just a minute. And I'm only bringing this up because Sean and Brian were going on this road again, where I was talking with them and talking about consoles and stuff, and Sean was having trouble, transferring SD card data on the Switch, because he doesn't have a proper, computer that reads SD cards. This isn't inherently about that. That's not controversial. He was just complaining. Though, as a quick side note to that, just because, I have a point here, but just as a side note to him complaining, John was acting due to the way he worded it in some cases, it kind of seemed like he was mad at Nintendo for how you have to transfer data using an SD card reader or writer, but it's that's not that weird, it's just unfortunate you don't have one. Also had to leave that in because that was funny as hell. I was just failing and then we reset and do the room again. But, so going back to the main point, so Sean, and this is always a heated discussion with him, we started talking about consoles, because then he actually starts complaining about even the PS4 having, like, shit storage space, where you basically buy a PS4, but if you want to actually save games, you need to basically buy a, like, $200 hard drive? And Sean had a small, like, 2 terabyte hard drive plugged into his PS4. And that small hard drive, he basically ran out of data on and was complaining about this ridiculous thing of needing, like, multiple, like, 2 terabyte hard drives. And then we get on this discussion where they start talking about solid state drives and stuff. And this whole point about, like, why haven't game companies made, like, larger solid state drives, like, standard in their consoles, because it's, like, a good solid state drive that's of a decent size wouldn't be that much money. And then I brought up that, and I said it referring to the meme, but this was a serious thing. Back when the PS3 was new, the first model PS3, the American retail price was $599 US, and nobody wanted to pay $600 for a console, and the reason they were selling it for $600 is because they needed to sell the console and charge that much money to justify having the Blu-ray components.
It's not just a Blu-ray, super old, fat PS3 models, I believe, also had, like, Linux or something pre-installed on them, and you could actually, if you had some technical know-how, put the console back in the developer mode to actually make games, but fucking in 2006, no one would understand how to do that, so that led to a bunch of people breaking their console.
But the main point was it was $600, basically,
Yeah,
because Blu-ray technology was expensive.
And all the other crap crammed in.
And the main reason that these modern consoles don't just give you, like, a 10 terabyte hard drive, first of all, solid state drives are not that advanced. Where solid state drives, the best we can do for those is only, like, 3 or 4 terabytes. USB hard drives can go well over 10, but those are notorious for, you know, being a little bit slow. Whereas a solid state drive is incredibly fast because it's literally a solid, like, plastic drive that spins. PS5 actually has a solid state drive. But going back to my point. So, the reason that game consoles and stuff, I was going to build to this whole other point, I'm just prepping it a little bit. The reason game consoles and stuff have, like, so much... Damn it. The reason game consoles don't actually use bigger drives and stuff, after, like, Sony had the PS3, and it just fell, like, spectacularly, they basically, no game manufacturer, like, no console maker wanted to ever, you know, be stuck with the PS3 again.
Also, isn't it, in terms of technology, solid state drive is a slightly newer technology?
No. Which is why it's in the PS5. And why it took the PS5 for Sony to finally make the Blu-ray disc that is high capacity and supports 100 gigs. And this literally only exists for video games, because even modern high-fidelity movies do not need to be 100 gigabytes.
Well, because I'm sure this is a point we're going to build to with Sony specifically. Arguably from the PS1 to the PS3, they didn't sell you game consoles, they were selling you a media player that is also a game
Yes,
console.
but this gets into the argument that I wanted to talk about that was the thing Sean said, where he goes on and on about, logically, And I'm sorry, I don't want this reality to exist because you don't realize the problem you're bringing up. Where Sean's like, logically, game consoles have to go all digital because it'll be cheaper, and then they don't have to limit, like, game creativity to the, like, limitations of a disc. You might think an all-digital console that has no physical format sounds good, but you're already complaining about a Blu-ray disc from the PS4 installing 50 gigabytes of data directly to your hard drive to speed games up. How do you think it would be if we now have an all-digital console where there is never going to be a physical game on this thing, and you have to download the console's games directly, but because it is digital only, anyone could basically put a game, like, any file size, so all of a sudden...
And that's like a funny example of that. Now, granted, this is because it's being billed as the cheaper option, but the Xbox One S and the One S equivalent for the One S, or as we'll call it, the SAD, because it was all.
It's the Xbox One.
It's all digital.
So it's the S all digital.
So
it's the SAD.
So you
call it the Xbox SAD.
That was for the original Xbox One. The like One X. I don't remember what that's like, smaller, cheaper, digital only version was. But my point was this shit basically is, now granted this is because it's a cheaper option, but the funny thing is, because fucking Xbox One X games and shit are so bloated, you will, I believe, fill up the natural storage of the, like, One S in only a couple of downloads.
Yeah.
Now, again, that's because of it being the cheaper option.
Yeah.
It's just one of those kind of funny things.
Yeah, and it goes to the main point I was building to, which is, like, you think, oh, logically, if they go all digital, the, like, constraints of a disc will be removed. You think you want that, except you're, like, and this is me speaking in general, but also kind of speaking to Sean, it's like, you're already complaining about your PS4, where it took, like, 2 or 3 years for you to fill up that hard drive because of games constantly forcing you to install 50 gigs. Be fucking thankful that there's a 50 gig limit. Imagine a world where Square can just, oh, it's a digital only console, so Square makes a, like, you know, Final Fantasy, like, 16 is 150 gigs.
Again, this is me because of the, like, 1S and shit being a smaller, cheaper budget thing. But the hilarious thing, there are some third-party Xbox One X games that cannot run on that thing because of its slightly inferior technology. All of Microsoft's first-party games, I believe they literally require it to be playable on both.
My point!
So it's mostly just a few third-party things, but I was again bringing that up as a thing of even a digital-only machine still has technical limits of certain things that can't run on it.
I'm just thinking about the unfortunate, sad reality where it's like, you're already complaining that the PS4 that you constantly need hard drives, and yet you're like, oh, if they made a digital-only console, they could remove the limitations of a disc. Then you're acknowledging that you're willing to download hundreds of gigs now that they don't have to worry about...
Red Dead Redemption 2 was, I believe, already nearly 100.
Yeah.
That is a 2-disc PS4 game.
Yeah, and the PS5 has high-capacity discs that support up to 100 gigs. Meaning, even on the PS5, you're gonna constantly deal with, like, depending on what the game is, you could have a game 80 to 100 gigs installed.
And that's why, because Red Dead Redemption 2 was the first game to do that, everyone makes a joke. Maybe having realistic horse balls shrinking in the cold isn't worth it. Because it's not. I don't need that if that's going to bloat the game's file size to triple digits.
So, the thing, and this is what I wanted to kind of rant about, because of learning this and having actual concrete evidence to something that people acted like I was an idiot just saying bullshit. That one Spider-Man modern game was on PS4, but it's also on PS5. The PS5 version has 4K textures, but the PS5 version is a smaller file size than PS4.
Doesn't it also have ray tracing?
Yeah. Because they actually optimized the PS5 version to work with the PS5 and how it loads and distributes data.
Oh boy, we're going fly fishing!
So, I just cut to, like, well, you know damn well I want to cut.
It's just gonna be the successful attempts of each size.
No.
Oh, it's just the first one and then the boy?
No, it's the fish you caught before the boy. Because, well, it kinda. Damn it. I left in you catching some varying fish sizes to show that they get a little bit bigger, but I didn't want to
get more money, meaning this is a decent way to grind the storage.
But I didn't want to be here that long, but I just thought it was good to cut to this. Specifically to show the varying degrees of, like, slightly bigger fish.
I think here it is.
Yeah. So I did leave in a...
Oh, yeah, that shit better be the thumbnail.
It is gonna be the fucking thumbnail. I have that ready to go, actually.
Good.
Well, it's not... the thumbnail's not done, but I have the image. Okay, so technically, what I did... So, we actually sat there fishing for, like, 10 minutes. But when I cut closer to getting the bigger fish. So I did show a couple of the...
Because of that terrible joke in old SpongeBob, I actually, as a child, thought fly fishing was you would basically...
And then I left in you just showing those off and like just...
Because I took the two screenshots, one, because that is the grabbing it, and the other one is when the number is on screen. It's like the initial pull-up, and then the other one is...
the biggest boy.
Yeah.
And then we were just sitting here talking. But my point is, the Spider-Man PS4 is bigger than the PS5 version because they actually optimized. And this is literally just cutting to the fucking posters. We're near the end of this thing. This is just cutting to the posters. And showing a few other fell things just to make a point, because it's up above, and at the time, I didn't know how to get up there, and we were trying to figure that out. And I wanted to leave this in, just because I wanted to show, exactly what triggered our ability to get up to the top. Which is, you come over here, and basically the blocks formed, and there's a block up top, and we were idiots and didn't notice it, it's right there. But then it's like, oh, I'm dumb, and then I'm on the block, and then you're jumping up, and somebody, you got it. Show it, land, and we're just cutting to the middle. When I do, like, really snappy editing, I'm just editing to just stuff.
And now this should be the last fucking task. Oh boy, the beating the
it's beating these two
without taking damage.
Yeah.
And then I'll go up the game for a minute. Like, this is
near the end of the part.
This is the common trope in a lot of Kirby games. I believe the story in Kirby's Adventures. There's always a stage where you have to fight all the mini bosses, but there's always a secret door in the level that if you enter it, the mini bosses are made harder, but because they're made harder, the in-between rooms give you
more stuff.
So it ultimately balances back out. The last task in this level was to beat the mini boss with this mini boss without taking damage. So we decided, fuck it, we're just going to use the easier version because the harder version just makes it a pain in the ass.
Because there's 3 of them, and there's
3 of them, and they add 2 of those indestructible cannon enemies.
Then I just show that, and then I just cut the pipe because there's a poster.
Yeah.
And then I actually don't cut because we were right at the end of the level. I just leave in, just walking out, and this is near the end of the part. My rambling point with the whole thing about games and like downloads, if we go digital only, you might think that's good, but that is going to mean you're going to need bigger and bigger hard drives because...
Like I said, and companies already do this. That gives basically companies an excuse to just release unoptimized garbage on the digital storefronts.
Yes!
Which they already fucking do.
But Square, well, most... as we end off here, I can say this. Square and a bunch of other companies, their PS4 games were notoriously unoptimized garbage.
Most Call of Duty games are apparently like 50 gigs or higher.
I'm gonna pause that and finish this little ramble. Because the thing about Blu-ray discs, a 2-layer disc is 50 gigs. And companies know that they could basically dump crap onto a 50 gig disc when your game might actually, if you optimize or compress data, you might be able to get a 50 gig game down to like 30. But, you know, God forbid it will take like a second or 2 longer of loading. Which is funny because the video I watched that brought up a lot of stuff was talking about multiple disc releases. And they said something, and what they said made me realize something, and it's so funny because this is super fucked up, and it's the general reason why the PS4 just kind of dumps data onto the hard drive directly. Because these companies realized people don't like the idea of a game loading, like, assets a little bit slower. So
That's the reason they give to pass that off. We all know it is laziness and greed. It is laziness, greed, and trying to kill physical media because, I have to go honest why you don't want a digital-only future. Not only will it blow file sizes, when we get to a digital-only future, you don't own any of your games because at that point, companies could take away games you have even owned and downloaded. Remember, a few weeks ago when Ubisoft was going to shut down the servers for a bunch of their games, and that seemed to mean even if people had owned and bought the game, they wouldn't be able to play a game's single-player content that they downloaded.
Yes, but we can turn this into a bit of a longer discussion in sort of the next part of post-commentary. It's going to be kind of the last big post-commentary part. But tons of people, Sean O'Brien does this as well, and what I'm about to say, ignoring that this is technically true, is ridiculous in the sense of, if you're just pretending this doesn't exist, you are being an idiot, and I will get this to a certain point, but I feel like people overemphasize this, where a bunch of people, like, oh, physical media is pointless anyway. You act like, oh, physical media is like your way of playing a game long after, like, the console has been, like, made obsolete. It's like, that might have worked back in the day, but, like, your, like, PS4 probably, every game you have probably has, like, 20 updates. If those updates go away, it's like, what are you left with? A useless piece of plastic that can't do anything. And people bring up, like, the Switch literally locks you out of playing a game unless you have the correct firmware. You have a Switch that has been factory reset because over time it deteriorated. All those supposed physical games you have are worthless. If you don't have the correct firmware update, they won't play. And it was this, like, video where someone's like, so how do you get around that? It's like, you could call it piracy, but the only people that are going to preserve your games are the so-called hackers and pirates. You want to play, like, the Switch, like, 20 years later? Just have the pirated soft mod to install firmware version, like, 29. Then all the firmware versions work. You want to play the, like, PS4 years after it's gone? Same idea. These people will also back up, like, flawless digital copies. Like, your physical media is worthless if your game ever updated. If you can't get that update back, what do you have? You have nothing. All these people that you call pirates that are illegally copying games, they're copying updates. They're saving that data. It's going to be those people that you're calling, like, dirty pirates. They're the only reason you're going to be able to, like, play the Switch 20 years later. And it was just this video going down this fucking tirade that physical media is worthless because updates. And to a certain extent, that is kinda true, but at the same...
Yeah, this is why a bunch of games will have later reprints where that shit is just pre-installed.
Need to be wrapping this up.
Yes, we do.
Now is not the time to go down this long rabbit hole of a ramble, but,
yes.
like, to sort of cap off at the moment the sort of discussion we're going on here, digital only, Sean and so many other people do this thing. The digital only is ultimately better because it removes, like, the limit of a disc, and technically digital data can be preserved forever, and it's the same logic the one video used, that if a so-called pirate, like, let's use this, Kirby as an example. If a so-called, like, pirate has, like, a modded Switch, and they take, like, a digital version of the Kirby, and the modded Switch, they basically get sort of past the copy protection and illegally copy the, like, source code of the game. That it's like 20 years later, it's like the so-called dirty pirate that copied Kirby and the Forgotten Land will basically preserve that Switch data, but it's like your physical copy, so like the physical copy we did this Let's Play with, is like that physical copy is only going to work if your Switch maintains the correct firmware and updates. If your Switch got factory reset, even if you have the physical copy, if it resets to like firmware 1 and the Kirby takes like firmware 10, how are you going to play your so-called physical copy? Then you just have a useless paperweight. And on the one hand, I get that, but you could technically, one, say that for, every fucking console.
And also, I seem to remember from my understanding, the games that mostly applies to are games that are already online focused anyway, like Fortnite and shit. So
the one video...
I said for the most part.
It's often games with online, because the one video at doing the kind of gacha moment brought up Animal Crossing does not function unless you have it up to a minimum of like, don't remember what firmware when Animal Crossing was released. I think it was like 7 or 8. If you have like 7, you need like 8 or 9 or whatever. It's like, I don't remember. I know me not remembering could sound kind of weird, because I don't remember the firmware update that existed when the Animal Crossing was new, but whatever it was, the Animal Crossing does not function unless your Switch is at a minimal. And that one video was sort of doing this gotcha moment of like, you claim physical media preserves it, but it's like, how can you play the game if, like, you factory reset your Switch? How are you gonna get your saves? Because the Switch literally won't load. And that is true, but to sort of wrap back to the other points, we can finish this off, because this is extending like 10 extra minutes. My biggest problem with digital only, and why that is ultimately a bad thing, is because game consoles are already weird, where so many game consoles require internet connectivity and day one updates and all this other shit. And that's already kind of annoying. But in a digital-only future where you can literally just take an unoptimized garbage game and just literally, you don't have to worry about the limitations of a disc. So, like, Final Fantasy 20 could be like 300 gigs. Do you really want Square to be allowed to force you to download? Like, half a terabyte is 500 gigs. Do you really want to be in the world where a company like Square has like 16K textures, and because they no longer have to worry about restraining it to some arbitrary disc or physical media, that they just force you to download like 500 gigabytes of data? Because we are not in a world where the internet infrastructure is good enough to allow that, where there are areas that just do not have good internet. Our internet is awful, where we do not have super good, like, our download is decent. We don't have great upload, which is why I can't stream. And our download is okay, but it's not the best. And it's like, if we were forced into a digital-only console and we had to constantly download hundreds of gigs, that would probably be 5 or 6 hours of waiting before we could play the game. And I don't like the reality where companies,
even people with good connections, have said certain bigger PS4 and Xbox One games taking nearly half a day to download because the machine itself literally, I believe, has a hard cap of how much data it can download at a single time.
Because cheaper parts to avoid $599 US.
It's also to prevent the machine from overheating.
Yeah, exactly. No, there's reasons for it. We need to wrap up.
Yeah.
My point, companies are already notorious about not optimizing. And this is why I love the Switch and Nintendo in general, because Nintendo in general, basically, and like, Sean was kind of honestly shocked that the Switch, that when you put the cartridge in that when you put a cartridge in the Switch, Sean was honestly shocked that the Switch cartridges did not just dump out, like, the entire game and force it onto your, SD card.
We have several games that are actually listed as using 0, bits of data in the Switch.
Because it seems to be such a tiny, inconsequential, and even as we wrap up, just one more point, the Wii U was actually also really good in the sense of, it had like kind of a pathetically small basic internal memory, and the base model, the white one, was even worse. But the discs didn't use up, like, the full capacity, and the disc was actually only storing a small bit of data where the rest would be taken by the disc. So in the age of, like, the PS4, where a combination of avoiding slightly worse load times and just chronic laziness, Nintendo's console actually did what consoles used to do. And this is what I'm finishing this long-ass rant on, and this is gonna be a long video. I'm just passionate about this nonsense. But anyway, finishing up. Because this is a bygone age, so, actually explaining this to people that might seriously be unaware. In the GameCube, PS2, and, original Xbox era, the reason for, like, memory cards and stuff, the save was just a couple of, like, megs, and the disc handled the bulk of the game. You were not putting the entire game on the memory card. You were just putting a tiny fraction to just contain the, like, save file, basically. And the disc was used to contain the rest of the game. But in the PS4 era, it was just easier for them to just force your hard drive to basically install the entirety of the game in this sort of weird attempt of, oh, it technically makes it load a little bit faster because they just didn't want to optimize and knew if they compress data that, God forbid, the loading goes from 3 seconds to 5. So, I'm going to cut to the question of the day, and the question is going to kind of continue this little rant, but with all of that said, we need to stop. So, I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I hope I will see you all next time. So, as always, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or good night, everybody. I hope you come back someday. See you later, but seriously, here comes the question of the day. It's time for the question of the day and my overall thoughts on the topic. So anyway, this question is a follow-up to the extended bit of discussion that was going on in the end slate, so I will try to keep this brief, but how do you feel about a video game console in the future going all digital and completely removing the ability to have physical games? Are you one of the people that thinks about games very similar to how Sean and Brian do, where logically digital only has to be the future because of removing the restraints of physical media? Or do you think about games the way me and Carson do, where you feel digital only being a bad idea because bloated file sizes that you would be forced to download? And don't even get me started on a digital only future that is basically an all digital streaming platform where you basically connect to a server and need constant internet to play your games, and if the internet dips out even a second, you basically lose progress because it boots you out of the game. And I'm not just talking about multiplayer, I mean, obviously, I'm talking about games that are single player experiences that need a constant internet connection because they're being streamed. Imagine you're trying to play a Final Fantasy game that's on a streaming only platform, and all of a sudden your internet has a blip and disconnects, and you basically get a message that due to the disconnection that you have been booted from the server or some shit, and if these streaming games do not have a constant, really consistent form of autosave, you might actually lose hours of progress because your internet cut out for a microsecond. But this is not about that. I just wanted to know if any of you agreed with me and Carson, or if you're more on the side of Sean and Brian any way, you can leave your thoughts, opinions, and answers in the comments, or you can leave them on social media. All of my social media links, as well as my Discord links, are in the video description. Now, as always, I need to be a shill for a minute. If you subscribe to the channel, and if you follow me on social media, that really helps our communities grow. But anyway, I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I hope I will see you all next time. So, as always, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or good night, everybody. I hope you come back someday. See you later.